Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a personality type that I can almost guarantee you've met.
Oh, definitely. Everyone knows one.
Right. Like maybe you've dated them, maybe you hired them, or maybe you see this person in the mirror every morning. It's that friend who calls you at like 2 in the morning with this totally life-changing business idea.
And they get you completely hyped up about it.
Exactly. You're ready to quit your job, and then 2 weeks later, you ask them about it and I don't know, they've moved to Bali to become a surf instructor or something.
We all know that exact person. They bring this just incredible, infectious heat to everything they touch. But the confusing part, for most people anyway, is just how quickly that heat can vanish.
Yeah, it really feels like whiplash. And I think usually, culturally, we label those people as flaky or, inconsistent.
Unreliable.
Right. But today, we're looking at a source that says, actually, no, that is not a bug. That's a feature.
It's their core design.
Exactly. So today we are digging into the Max Energy ME80 Personality Assessment Report. Specifically, we're doing a dedicated deep dive into a profile they call the WSFN, also known as the Spark Chaser.
It is such a great name, the Spark Chaser. And, to really understand this profile, you have to understand the system they come from first, the ME80.
Right, because this isn't your typical magazine quiz.
No, not at all. It's not your standard, are you introverted or extroverted kind of test. It's an energy profiler. So it doesn't really care about your social skills or your outer persona. It cares about your mechanics.
Mechanics?
Yeah. How does energy enter your system? How is it processed internally? And then how does it explode outward into the world?
So it's less about personality quirks and more like, I don't know, like an engineering diagram of a human engine.
That is the perfect way to look at it. And the WSFN engine, the Spark Chaser, is basically a high-performance combustion-based machine.
Okay, I love that.
Right.
Let's pop the hood then. I want to start with their identity, the
Right.
core philosophy.
Let's do it.
Because the report has this hero section right at the beginning with a quote that really threw me off at first.
Oh, the rebuilding one.
Yeah. It describes the Spark Chaser as someone who quietly rebuilds from within, sealing fractures back into wholeness. And I read that and thought, it sounds really gentle.
Like a healer.
Yeah, like a healer. But then we call them Spark Chasers, and we talk about combustion engines and fire. How do those two totally different vibes coexist?
That is the central paradox of this personality type. Think about what fire actually does in nature.
Well, it burns things down.
It burns, yes, but in an ecosystem, fire is an agent of transformation. It clears out the dead wood, it cauterizes wounds. The Spark Chaser isn't just running around lighting matches just for the fun of it.
They're not just pyromaniacs.
Exactly. They are actively looking for things that are stagnant, things that are stuck or broken, so they can reignite them. The system defines them as an activation kindling personality type.
Activation kindling. So their whole baseline purpose is to just start the reaction.
That's their purpose, yeah. But here is the slightly darker side of that identity. Because they are fundamentally designed to ignite, their control mechanism, basically the way they view reality and judge their own safety,
Yeah.
it is entirely based on emotional temperature.
Emotional temperature. Okay, break that down for me.
They literally need to feel heat to know they are alive.
Yeah.
They possess this incredibly acute sensitivity to emotional warmth and the flow of life. For a Spark Chaser, the absolute scariest thing in the world is not failure.
Really? Because everyone's afraid of failure.
They aren't. They are totally fine with crashing and burning. The true nightmare for them is numbness, stagnation, the flat line.
Wow. That sounds, frankly, exhausting. Because most people, we want stability. We work really hard to get to a place in life where things are just calm.
Right.
You're saying the WSFN feels actively unsafe when things are calm?
Unsafe and almost non-existent. Their core philosophy is that action validates reality.
Action validates reality.
Yes. If they aren't feeling a strong emotion, whether that's passion, excitement, or even intense risk, they start to feel like they are fading away, like a ghost. They don't just want the spark. They need the spark to confirm they actually exist.
Oh, wow. So that 2 a.m. business idea from the friend we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
that isn't just them being enthusiastic. It's almost a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
They're trying to shock themselves back into existence.
You've got it perfectly. And this need is exactly what drives their energy matrix. This is that core engine we mentioned. The ME80 report breaks their unique energy signature down into this really clear 4-beat cycle.
Okay, what's the cycle?
It goes ignite, advance, cool, reignite.
Ignite, advance, cool, reignite. That really is a literal combustion cycle.
It is, and it operates on a pulse, so it's not a steady hum like a refrigerator in the background. It's a revving engine. And to understand why they do what they do, we have to look at the 4 layers of this matrix. This is where the system gets really granular.
Okay, let's walk through these layers. Because I saw the acronyms in the report, IP, IQ, EQ, and honestly, when I see IP, my brain immediately goes to intellectual property.
Which makes sense in business, but yeah, not what we're talking about here.
Okay, so what is the IP layer for a spark chaser?
In this framework, IP stands for the inner value layer. This is the deepest part of their subconscious. And for the WSFN, the IP layer functions as risk perception activation.
Risk perception. See, to me, that sounds like a safety sensor. Like a radar on a ship looking for icebergs so you can steer far away from them.
For most people, that's exactly what it is. But for the spark chaser, the polarity is totally flipped. This internal radar is not looking for safety. It is hunting for potential energy.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it scans a room or a project or even a new person they just met, and it asks, is there a spark here? Is there a risk worth taking? It's actively looking for the fuel source.
So it's essentially a heat-seeking missile.
In a way, yes. It detects where the potential for ignition lies. And once that IP layer says, okay, target acquired, the energy moves up to the second layer, the IQ layer.
Which is the emotional activation layer.
Correct.
So what happens there? Is this where they logically analyze the data they just found?
Oh, definitely not with logic. The IQ layer is the experience and validation assessment. It's basically a filter. It takes that spark and asks, does this make me feel vitality?
It's checking for a pulse.
Exactly. It's checking for resonance. So a spark chaser could be looking at a great business opportunity on paper. High profit, zero risk, perfectly sensible. But if their IQ layer doesn't get that thump-thump feeling in the chest, they will literally just walk away.
That explains so much. I
Yeah.
have seen people like this turn down perfect, safe jobs for something completely wild and unstable.
Yep.
And it's just because the safe job didn't pass that IQ filter, it didn't make them feel alive.
Precisely. For them, logic is completely secondary to vitality. Now, if it does pass the IQ check, if they feel that the energy hits the EQ layer, this is decision calculation. And this is probably the most unique part of the WSFN profile.
How so? What makes their decision process so different?
Well, think about how you make a decision. Usually we think of decision-making as a pause, right? We stop, we weigh the pros and cons, maybe make a list, and then we decide to act.
Yeah, that's the normal way to do things.
Right. But for the spark chaser, the EQ layer is defined as emotional expression and release, meaning the decision is the action.
Wait, run that by me again. The decision is the action. There's no pause.
No pause. They often don't even know what they've decided until they hear themselves say it out loud or physically see themselves doing it.
That is wild.
It's just internal pressure. It builds up in the IP and IQ layers until it just releases. They don't sit on the couch and think, I should quit my job tomorrow. They just walk into the boss's office and say, I quit. The expression of the emotion is the decision mechanism.
That is terrifyingly impulsive. But I guess, it's efficient.
It's incredibly fast. Which leads directly to the final layer, the manifestation layer. This is the energy released outward, the visible result. Because they skipped that whole hesitation phase, their output in the real world is explosive. They make things happen immediately.
Okay, so just to recap that engine, the radar scans for risk, which is the IP layer. The heart checks for vitality, the IQ layer. The pressure builds and releases as immediate action in the EQ layer. And boom, manifestation.
That's the roadmap. And it perfectly leads to their core internal trait, which the report beautifully summarizes as fire confirms existence.
We touched on this a bit, but let's go deeper into those internal traits.
Yeah.
The report says they, quote, self-correct through attempting. I really love that phrase, but I want to push back on it a bit.
Sure.
Isn't that just a fancy, polite way of saying trial and error?
It is trial and error, but with a massive nuance of speed. Look, most people try to simulate the future in their heads. They think, if I do option A, then outcome B will probably happen.
Right. Mental modeling.
Yes. The spark chaser is fundamentally incapable of trusting that mental simulation. They have to touch the stove to know if it's hot. They have to launch the product to see if anyone buys it. They identify truth purely through motion.
So they can't think their way to the truth. They have to act their way there.
Correct. Remember we said they draw stasis back into flow. If a team is stuck in analysis paralysis, just debating for weeks, the spark chaser is the one who finally says, Let's just build the crazy option and see what breaks. They shatter the deadlock.
Okay, I see the value in that. But here comes the skepticism. That sounds fantastic for starting things, but life isn't just about starting. Relationships, careers, long-term investments, they require endurance.
Yes, they do.
And looking at the shadow section of this report, I see a term that looks like a giant glaring red flag: unstable endurance.
This is their blind spot. And honestly, if you are listening to this and you're in a relationship with a spark chaser or you're managing one at work, this is the part you really need to listen to. The paradox here is this: proximity brings ignition, but stability needs scaffolding.
Break that down for me. Proximity brings ignition.
When they first get close to something, a new partner, a brand new job, a startup, the heat is intense. They're all in. They're sending you flowers every day. They're working 18-hour days without complaining. They are fully ignited.
Because it's new and risky.
Right. But remember the cycle. Ignite, advance.
And then cool.
The cooling phase. It is inevitable. As soon as the situation actually stabilizes, when the romance becomes just a comfortable, safe routine, or the startup becomes a regular functioning company, their internal fuel source cuts off. The warmth declines rapidly.
And this is where the damage happens in relationships, right?
Right.
Because the person on the other end feels like the rug was just completely pulled out from under them.
It can absolutely feel like a betrayal. One week they are your biggest fan, making you the center of their universe, and the next week they are just distant and scrolling on their phone. The report refers to this social dynamic as heat-cool oscillation.
Heat-cool oscillation. So people around them feel almost infected by their radiant energy initially. But then they get deeply anxious when the cooling starts. They probably think, what did I do wrong?
Exactly. And the answer is almost always nothing. You did nothing wrong. You just became stable. You became safe. And safe doesn't trigger their IP radar anymore.
Man. So is the spark chaser just doomed to bounce from one obsession to the next, leaving this trail of disappointed, exhausted people behind them? Or is there a hack to fix this?
There is a hack. The report is very clear on the solution here. It says distance allows integration.
Distance. So you pull away from them.
They need space. If you try to cling to them during their cooling phase, if you demand, why aren't you exciting anymore? Love me exactly like you did last week, you will suffocate them. They need to pull back to process their own tempo.
So you just have to let them go into their cave for a bit.
Let them cool down. Let them be bored. Let them recharge their engines. If they have structural support, like a partner who is secure and doesn't panic when they go quiet, or a business manager who just quietly handles the boring logistical stuff, they can and will reignite.
That is such crucial advice. Distance allows integration. It's totally counterintuitive because when someone pulls away, our human instinct is to grab onto them tighter.
Right, but with the WSFN, you have to let the rubber band stretch.
Let the rubber band stretch.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I assume that exact same dynamic applies to business and their careers too. Which brings us to their commercial value. The report calls them the ignition force.
Which seems pretty obvious now, right?
Yeah, if you need a fire started, you call the arsonist.
Let's call them a controlled demolition expert.
Fair enough. Controlled demolition expert.
Their core business value is lifting action rhythm from contemplation.
Which is a very fancy corporate way of saying getting people off their butts.
It really is. Look, in the corporate world, inertia is the default state. Things want to stay exactly the same. The spark chaser is the anti-inertia agent. They push entire teams from just imagining a solution toward actually attempting it. They create this emotional contagion that makes people believe the impossible is doable right now.
So let's talk about recommended career fields. Because I'm imagining putting a spark chaser in, like a back office compliance role or data entry, and that seems like a recipe for absolute disaster.
It would be psychological torture for everyone involved. The ME80 report recommends 4 specific professional fields where this ignition force becomes a massive superpower.
So what's the first one?
First is new project launch or deadlock breaking.
The SWAT team. You're completely stuck, negotiations have failed, send in the spark chaser to blow it up and restart.
Exactly, shattering stalemates. The second field is creative experimentation and prototype advancement.
Because they learn by doing.
Right. Let them build the ugly first prototype. Let them fail fast and break things. They don't have that ego attachment to perfection that slows so many other personality types down. They just want to rapidly validate if a concept works in the real world.
Right, the touch the stove mentality.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the third recommended field?
Market frontlines. This ties right back to that IP radar we talked about. They should always be where the action is. Sales, trend spotting, crisis response. They can literally sense a hot spot or a shifting trend in the market way before the data analyst can even build a chart for it.
Wow. And the fourth field.
Early stage change mobilization. If a massive company needs a total culture overhaul or a startup needs a hard pivot, the spark chaser is the cheerleader who actually believes in the pivot. They can ignite passion in a defeated team because their excitement is so genuine.
It sounds like they're the ultimate 0 to 1 personality.
They absolutely are. But the warning here is implicit in everything we've discussed. Do not expect them to be your 1 to 10 person.
Right. Once the project is running smoothly and it's just about maintenance.
Hand it off. Hand it off to a stable manager and give the spark chaser a brand new impossible problem to solve.
That is such a huge takeaway for me. We spend so much time in society trying to fix people, trying to make the spark chaser consistent and steady and predictable. But you're saying we should just lean into the burst.
We have to. Trying to make them a steady hum is just going to break the machine. And that leads to the conclusion of the report, which I think frames this perfectly.
Let's hear the golden sentence.
It says, the spark chaser is a critical flame. With structural support and stable rhythm, their kindling becomes not a fleeting glow, but a continuous force driving genuine momentum.
Not a fleeting glow. That's the ultimate goal. It's really about building a solid fireplace around the fire so it heats the entire house instead of just burning it down.
That was a brilliant analogy. The structure doesn't dampen the fire at all. It just directs it.
So if you are listening to this right now and realizing, oh no, I am definitely a spark chaser, or maybe, oh wow, I married a spark chaser, hopefully this deep dive gives you a completely new lens to view that energy. It's not about suppression. It's about understanding the rhythm.
Absolutely. Understanding the mechanical cycle is the very first step to not being controlled by it.
And look, we have covered so much ground today, but the ME80 system goes way deeper than just this one single profile. If you want to see the full report, or if you're curious to find out what your own specific energy type is, you really should go straight to the source.
Yes. All of this analysis comes from the Max Energy ME80 Personality Assessment Report. You can find them at their official website, which is www.maxenergylife.com.
And I know they have a pretty active community online as well, right?
They do. You can search on Facebook for Max Energy Epi, or you can search for Metanergy HE. There is a lot of really great discussion in those groups about how all these different energy types interact with each other in the real world.
Awesome. We will put all those links in the show notes so you don't have to pull over your car to write them down right now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for diving into the fire with us today. It has been a really intense ride.
It's always a wild ride when we're talking about the spark chasers.
It really is. And, it leaves me thinking, if the spark chaser's entire existence relies on finding stagnant things to ignite, what happens to them if they actually succeed in fixing everything around them? Do they finally rest, or do they just start breaking things on purpose just to feel the heat again?
Now that is a dangerous question.
Something for you to mull over. Until next time, keep your radar on, and we'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.